to facilitate this conversation. And so we pulled some people that we knew had some experiences that is going to be beneficial to moving forward and how we take this law to in April 7th, April 7th, and to be voted on. And so this is an informational session, so we want to ask as many questions, and they're going to give us the answers that we need. And I'm going to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and I will start off with Mr. Jason.
State Representative Jason Fields, thank you for having me, for putting this together. Been a huge fan since I think we did this the first session, which is about 2016, 2017. And so, yeah, happy to be here. Love what it stands for, and happy to get after it.
State Representative David Crowley, representative of the 17th Assembly District, co-author of Marsys Law. When I thought about this, when we were approached about Marsys Law, it was something we definitely had to take a look at, and especially when you think about crime in general, those who perpetrate and those who are victims. And so when I thought about where I come from, perpetrators and victims look a lot like me. And so when you think about making sure that people have their rights and know their rights, it's also making sure that victims understand that as well.
Hi, I'm Julie Valdez. I've been active in the community as an advocate for different issues. I'm also a survivor and going through a situation, and so I'm happy to be able to do what I can to lend my voice to the importance of victims' rights and being able to make sure that they have access to the services that they need.
I'm Melissa Edwards, also a survivor and a domestic abuse advocate. I've been working in the community for about 2 years now, advocating for
Thank you. So we will put a disclaimer out there, like we said a little earlier, that this will be a video that is going to be released to the public. We have survivors up here, but our survivors have been through some things, and that they're going through some things right now. So some questions they will not ask, can't ask, and share. So we're just going to make sure that they're as comfortable as possible with the questioning. They're willing to have general statements, but also willing to have some personal, let everyone know what their personal experiences are based on their comfort levels. So we're okay with that?
Yeah.
All right. So what we're going to do is, since you are co-founder, we're going to allow you to start to kind of, what was the concept behind this?
This was basically about, if I'm not mistaken, Marsys Law is about a young woman who was murdered, in the California area. And when it came down to the perpetrator being released and information related to that perpetrator, a lot of that information wasn't being shared with the victims, not her family. And so, when they talked about having rights for victims, they really made this an issue to really fight for in California, to start to spread really now across the nation, but now here in the state of Wisconsin. And when we first started doing this, again, it was just the fact that, we need to make sure that the victims' voices are raised to the same level of protection, but also in making sure that there's a level of accountability from the system. We know that currently, right now, the system hasn't been working to the best of its ability. Some would say that the system is working the way it's set up to work. But it's important that when we think about the system, that we do have people that we protect. The system is there for a reason, and we wanted to make sure that we can improve it for victims' rights. And so, to make sure that their voices are heard, that there's a level of accountability with DAs, with police officers, with judges when it comes down to allowing victims' voices to be heard, it was a no-brainer. And so, it wasn't an easy thing, because we went back and forth. We wanted to make sure that you don't trump the the rights of a defendant in this sense, because we want to make sure that those rights are still in place. So we wanted to make sure that it was written the way it needs to be written, and so we were really excited about this piece of law. So we signed on.
So was that hard to do, to still try to support victims, but then with staying in the rights of a defendant?
Well, the thing is, when you think about the Constitution, it's always the state versus the defendant. And it's not necessarily the victims versus the defendant, quote unquote, it's the state. And so it's extremely important that there's a delicate balance, because this is also about justice and making sure that there is due process for whoever the defendant is. And so there is a delicate balance, but I think that the way that we crafted it here in Wisconsin, we've seen different types of lawsuits across the state when it comes to this, and we've learned from those lawsuits. And so we wanted to make sure that we did the right thing here in the state of Wisconsin.
Okay. And you find it to be extremely successful in other states. That's why we're trying to.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about these types of laws, there may be kinks here and there, but when I think about what we've been able to create here, I think that we probably have the best Marsys Law across the state, across the United States.
So I do want to, because there's a lot of questions that are based on an interpretation of what you all have in front of you, which is a list of what the law is currently and what the wording or verbiage of what we're trying to change it to, correct? We don't have to go.
You know what? Just really quick, I do want to say this. Now, some of the stuff in Marsys Law are already law. Okay, there are procedures that aren't necessarily goes to a constitutional rights level, which we are doing here.
Okay.
Some of them weren't even actually in the law at all. So there's some that were raised to a constitutional level, basically.
Okay. So, I think that I'm not gonna call this conversation because I'm super excited about this. So let me, before we go into the proposed changes, is there anything you, Melissa or Julie, want to share of what has not worked that this might help? So you guys have had the opportunity to kind of read over what's listed here. So which one stuck out to you that may impact you and what you're going through?
I would just say that we just said having it be at constitutional levels instead of just statutory, so that gives you recourse if something isn't followed correctly, you don't get access to the rights that you have, the services provided, that there's something you can do about it. One of the things in here that really stuck out to me that is an additional piece to my understanding would be when it comes to the pleas offered. At least in my experience, I was not part of the process or informed of the plea offered. So I think that's an important part of the justice.
And which letter is that? Which one is that? Which one?
I believe.
Okay. So what it says current, the black is current, correct? What it is currently? Okay, so upon request to be heard in any proceeding during which a right of the victim is implicated, including release, plea, sentencing, disposition, parole, revocation, expungement, or pardon.
The red is current.
So the red is current.
The black is good.
Okay, so that's what we want it to be. And it expands on what is current, right? So what current is the opportunity to make a statement to the court at a disposition only.
Right.
So, okay.
You know, that was
huge.
one that, you know, you and I were looking over this, and that was one that really stood out to both of us.
Right. So I'm like, why wouldn't it be? It just seems like it should be
The other way
a
around.
no-brainer to be able to speak up in these other areas. But
I mean, you gotta realize, it's sometimes the law is just the law and it changes at different time periods. I mean, and let's be honest, it wasn't like victims were getting a lot of leeway or rights to begin with. And so when you have things more, we live in an age now where more things are, we see it more. I mean, and we experience it more. And so when you have people coming forward, I think as we were talking about over there, where there are a lot of victims who they went through something, they had no idea whether the person got released, what the police situation was. If that's not something you deal with every day, you don't think about, well, is this law being beneficial to you? It's only until you have victims step forward and say, look, you guys may want to look at this. And so then we change the law to go, okay, how can we be more fair, I think, and equitable, and to be more, to treat people more humanely? I mean, when you really look at this stuff, all this stuff should be no-brainer, right? You would think it's all no-brainer, but until you get people coming forward saying, look, this is a problem, that's what we have to start addressing.
right, which was how Marsys Law started, because her mom, after her death, her ex-boyfriend killed her, that he was in jail and he got out, and the mom was in the grocery store and ran into him. And so she had no idea that he had bailed himself out there. And so can you just imagine the person who just killed your child, that now he's in the grocery store? Like, I feel like you shouldn't be able to eat, but you in the grocery store, living life, and I'm dealing with a lost child. So,
Yeah, we all know people who that kind of stuff has happened.
Right.
Somebody got out and then you're like, whoa, what happened?
Right.
Why am I looking at this person?
Right.
Who just did something or who committed something? Why am I, again, that's a no-brainer for all of us.
Right.
But until people start pointing it out saying, look, you all got to get on this and change some stuff, it would have kept happening.
Okay. Then that totally makes sense. So, Melissa, any of these stand out for you?
Yes, actually, I was looking at the letter F.
F as
Yes.
okay.
So, in my experience, actually, in two separate situations, the breakdown started with the police. It didn't even get to the court system, whereas the police didn't make an arrest, they didn't file adequate report, there was no narratives, and at that point, I was left with no protection at all. So, I feel like in some of these instances, before it can even get to a court level or a legislative level, it has to start with the people who are working on the streets, which would be the police officers and the advocates and the people to protect us. So that was the biggest thing that stood out to me.
So what that one says, not to interrupt you, but currently the Constitution says, reasonable protection from the accused throughout the criminal justice process. So what we wanted to now read is to reasonable protection from the accused throughout the criminal and juvenile justice process. I was a little confused. Can you elaborate on that?
So some of these laws, they touch on in the Constitution. Some of them are just statutory, and I think that's what we have to be clear, is that some of them doesn't explicitly say these things. And so when you have statutes, or even in the Constitution when they are that vague, sometimes it's like, okay, what does this really mean? And so some of this now is really being more explicit than it is than just saying you have reasonable protection. I think the other thing is that the level of accountability now also on the system when you talk about this within the Constitution. One of the things you touched on was that it even gets to the criminal justice process. This is with the police department. And so even Senator Van Langard, who was one of our co-sponsors, co-authors of this bill, he's a former police officer, and he understood why we needed to raise it to a constitutional level as well, because he said there has to be a level of accountability. And if there are officers who aren't willing to hold themselves up to a standard and inform those victims of what's going on, at least he or she can share, right? Then they shouldn't really be working on these types of cases in the first place. And so it's extremely important that when we think about, some of this is touched on, but because we wanted to explicitly put this in the statute, I think this is more so what we're getting at. So you can look at it as a victim's crime unit. It's really like a victim bill of rights. It's really saying that this is what I have access to explicitly in the Constitution right now. Because if you don't know where to find this information unless you are, a lawyer.
And that particular one did not include juvenile prior.
Excuse me, sir, can you come up?
Add into that subject. I just wanted to touch on that because that was one of the ones that I really liked. Previously, that did not include the juvenile part. So the juveniles were left out of that. And in our community, we have a lot of crime victims who are juvenile, and they were not protected under the Constitution or legislation. So now new legislation will include juveniles as well.
Thank you, Simon. Before we move on, do we have any questions for anybody up here so far? Now, I'm going to put you on the spot.
I was just going to say that.
So, do you mind being on camera? Okay.
Well, I have an answer.
So, you serve on the board of Marsys Law, trying to get this going, correct?
One of the field directors.
One of the field directors. And what is your strategy? What is it that you guys are doing to make sure that this is out there and that it's heard and that people get the information that's needed?
Just trying to find an audience, and any audience that will listen to me. So reaching out to Rotary clubs, reaching out to church Bible studies, reaching out to just any group of people that will allow us to share, to let them know that this is on the ballot. This is something that we will have the opportunity to vote on. And wherever you stand in life politically, whatever experiences that you may or may not have experienced, your voice is going to need to be heard on this. So we are just looking for the opportunity to share Marsy's story and any other victims who have the strength to share their stories as well. To say that this is something that we need to help promote and put into our Constitution. Okay. Wisconsin, we're blessed at this point to have what statutes we do have already. We have a lot of groundwork already there. This is just going to solidify it and give those people who have not been victims, it'll put into place somewhat of an insurance policy and then to help our neighbors and those who have been.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, can you touch on something she said? It's talk about the bipartisan part, because I think a lot. I would like to hear Jason and David talk about the bipartisan part going into putting this together, because a lot of times people hear this stuff and they think, oh, it's Democrat or oh, it's Republican, but this is something that affects all families across all spectrums and all political parties. So I'd like to hear them speak on that.
Yeah, I mean, a great point. Way to point that out, Simon. I think it is there are times in the legislature where I think what the public sees is us fighting a lot, or you see the disagreement. But what most people don't know, there are a ton of things that we all agree on. And issues like this, Representative Colley mentioned Senator Wangar, who's a former police officer, former police union captain, President Mike Ravello, who is a Republican conservative. I think he's actually on Marsys Law website testifying, giving a testimony of why this is important. There are those things where it transcends race, creed, culture, and this is one of those. And so we're always happy to be a part of that when the political stuff gets put to the side, the games, because this is not a game. Like, so it's time out for that stuff. But when you have things like this where there are real people being suffering dire consequences from actions of others, it's nice when this is something we can just do. Right? And so when we saw that, I mean, I think when I first heard about it, when I got back in the legislature, I looked at it, and it was a no-brainer to me. And so when you have those no-brainer issues, you really want to get on board.
And yeah, I had a great time actually working with Representative Todd Novak, who co-authored this with me. We went back and forth and worked with many different groups, whether they was for or against it. And there were a lot of people who just wanted to make sure that whatever piece of legislation that we crafted was going to be solid for Wisconsin. So that's why I'm really excited about this piece of legislation, because it's almost like a bill of rights for vehicles, and you get to elevate. You know, now it's like, well, it's not a constitutional right? And you know, it's funny because when we talk about our rights, everybody says, "Well, I know my constitutional rights." We never had any as a victim, right? And so, you know, so now we can say that. Now, when people look up their constitutional rights, they know what rights they actually have as a victim in the state.
So what were some of the things that they were against? Some of your opposing?
Well, I think it was, I guess I can't say it was just like one thing. It was more so like making sure that this doesn't hinder the process in a sense. So whether you are for or against it, making sure that this doesn't drag along the process. What kind of burden would this put on types of lawyers and police officers? At the end of the day, when you think about the burden, it's just like, you know, why is it a burden to reach out to a victim and let them know? Not every victim is going to call you, because a lot of this says upon request, right? And so, you know, this isn't like they got to do, everybody is going to, you know, they have to call everybody. These are for folks who like, you know what, I want to be involved with this whole process from the start to the beginning, right? And they're going to get that information. But this is also just saying that, you know, upon request, they know. Like, we want to make sure they can get time. We want to make sure that that's why we make sure that like time in there and things of that nature. Because we want to make sure that we're doing what we need to do without putting too much of a stress on the system. But also making sure that we preserve the rights of defendants, right? And so, you know, at the end of the day, you know, it is a system where you're innocent until proven guilty. And so in order for that system to stay in place, and use a protection, because it depends on who you are, the system works or not. I think that, you know, just making sure that the system is in place to work as well as it can, while also making sure that we are preserving and giving the dignity to the folks who are being victimized in the whole process.
So does this cross into family court?
I guess it can. I mean, it really doesn't matter.
Or should it? If it doesn't.
I think it should. That's-
I'm only bringing that question because I know their answers.
Oh,
I was gonna say, so I'm not a lawyer. But you know, we're not. I mean, a victim is a victim. We're not saying what type of crime it
Right.
is. So that's a good question. But a victim is a victim, and so these rights, whether you, I don't think no matter what the situation is, your rights are elevated to the same as that.
So I think if you guys want to speak on how that does for you as you're going through the criminal process and you have children together, that how they cross over and how there's still maybe some work to do in regards to recognizing that although I have children with this person, there's a criminal case here too, and should that be taken into consideration and what does that look like? And so if you want to share what some of the things you may have experienced or some generalities of what you're comfortable with sharing. That's how it didn't work when it should have crossed over.
Yeah, I'll be a little bit careful with how much I share on this, but in my experience, I've been through criminal court, civil court, and family court, still going through it. And when it comes to the protection piece, I think we were just talking about that one, where you'll have the ability to have the protection you need. And I have done what I can to advocate to get the information I need, which is sometimes a barrier, done that work, gotten things like a domestic violence injunction or restraining order in place, done the work to get that. But between the criminal court, the civil court, and the family court, there's, in my case, there's been confusion as to who has the authority. Family court will say, I can trump civil court, I can trump an injunction. And that does not protect the victim nor the children, at least in my case, and that's a big concern that I have. And I don't know how all these things will play out, but I would imagine that having more constitutional backing for rights for victims would help support some of those things, where if you have a protective order in place, it needs to be honored. Would be a little bit I can share from my experience.
And so again, excuse me, mine didn't rise to the criminal court, of course. However, there were still documentations to show that there was a serious issue that was happening. And there was a pattern of it. And in relation to how it falls into family court is, for example, one of the things I was looking at on here was, I think it was number African. And how, or no, maybe it was, it was one of the things that I was looking at, but it was talking about interviewing or disposition of the victim on the request of the accused party, and having to go through mediation and then report to an abusive person was something that was horrible. And it's like, well, how can you mediate with somebody who is psychologically, emotionally, verbally abusive toward you, and who has threatened you and made you feel threatened before, and be successful with that. And so that was one thing that I had to work through in my particular case. And then another thing I saw here was about having to
Jay is the one you're talking about, the way psychological. Jay.
Jane?
Yes, that's,
Okay.
I was just, thank you. So Jay, and that's another thing, I think, in not having the right information or being educated on how this really does affect only causes more trauma onto the victims throughout the process, even within the court system. And another thing that I feel I noticed with being in court for several years, that's another issue, is the amount of time and having to stay in court and repeat the same things over and over again. But another thing that I noticed just with the different systems in place in Wisconsin is that they're not communicating well enough with one another. As she had mentioned that, it seemed that there was some confusion within civil court, court, and family court. Well, that could be also that the courts are doing things differently or maybe not communicating well enough to one another for particular, individual cases. So I've seen some of that within the court system as well in Wisconsin. So I think it's very, very important for people to understand that whether it is criminal or family and there is a crime, whether it has been charged or not, to be sensitive to the needs of the victims in the case. Because having to go and face this person over and over again and having to, again, explain things over and over again, it does have an impact on us, and it does hinder us from being able to fully heal or get that process even really started, because it's like we're continuing to be victims. And I think it's even worse in a situation where a crime hasn't been actually processed or somebody hasn't actually been prosecuted because they look at you as though it's not true, it never happened. And that's not true at all. And so I think that just makes things even more difficult to have to navigate through the entire system.
I think that's why because that's the current situation now, and I think what you're talking about, if you look on you guys' sheets, J and L, the ability, I think those are some of the proposed changes that will hopefully help limit or reduce that, being able to refuse that trauma or reliving that experience over and over again, which I think is why it's important that we get this done. But I agree. I mean, I think how the courts will play it, I believe, I would hope that once this is done in the full effect, that the courts will begin to consider these components of the law to now, when they start looking at working out remediation, things of that nature, they will consider these kinds of laws, which they would have to now say that you have the right to refuse under the circumstances that you're in. Again, not being lawyers, so we don't want to get into pretending like we know the law. But I would imagine that that's the way that should proceed, that they would have to consider those kinds of points now because it is law.
So do you have to be charged with a crime as a victim to be protected under the Marsys Law? Does it have to? It's a criminal case, and so he's being charged with criminal activity against a victim, correct? He doesn't have to be charged for these things to happen to continue to protect a victim, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, and what Melissa was saying is that because he was not criminally charged,
Is she still a victim, basically?
yeah,
Does she not have that protection?
Well,
right.
The way this new legislation works is, because in the past, it would be up to the legislation to
Can we
determine.
have a chair, sir? Thank you. I'm calling you just-
You've been up here so many times, you want to
Chair, sir, and you would be.
I'm Simon Warren. I am a Milwaukee representative for Marsys Law. So in the past, what happened was, technically the legislator would decide who was a victim of a crime. Now the way that this new referendum as of April 7, once it's passed, will read is, the moment you're involved, let's use a car accident. You're in a car accident. You are immediately now protected under these rights. Almost like a Miranda right? It's almost like getting a Miranda right card. The minute something happens, you are now protected under this Marsys Law. And the one he was speaking to before, where it says, when we talk about, you don't have to continuously keep giving this statement and giving this statement and giving this statement, right?
Because we know that sometimes when people are victims, those who abuse us will use that to taking us through all type of agony and make it painful for us. This way, until you're in a court setting, they can't call you and be like, we need to see your diary. We need to see this. Bring your underwear down here. Bring your bra down here. Whatever the crime is, to harass you, because we know that people will harass you. I think sometimes it's a strategy of theirs to get you to quit. We've talked to people all across the city who've said, been going through this for a while, for a couple of years now, and we keep having to come back to court. We keep having to come back to court. And it's a strategy used to get victims to give up and quit and say, I'm tired of it.
Because it
Forget
can
it.
be financially draining.
And
Financially
emotionally,
draining.
mentally, all of those
Right.
things, yes.
Because I can't continue, I have to feed my family. I can't
You
keep
have to take off
paying
work.
for,
Mhm.
I can't keep paying for legal fees and taking off work to show up at court. And, yeah, that's a definite strategy. We had a question?
Yeah, my daughter, her perpetrator didn't go to get charged for 2 years. And during that time, I lost my grandchildren.
To his family.
Yes, yes.
Wow. So for 2 years, in the process of them trying to convict him,
Yeah, 2
he
charges.
still had rights. He still had the rights.
He had all the rights in the world.
Yeah. So how would that affect the situation if we were, so does what you were saying, would that go into effect? It's still treading that line where you say you still have to.
Well, one of the things
have
that
to
You're going to
protect
now
the-
when you're talking about, because this is a different court system in this sense too, because now you're talking about going to family court. which
But if
is
you go to
also,
D, if you go to D, and that's another reason why juvenile is included in this now. But if you go to D, Goike is one of the supporters of this, and that's one of the things he wanted in this is D. To timely disposition of the case free from unreasonable delay.
Yeah.
It previously said current constitution, timely disposition of the case. To timely disposition of the case free from unreasonable delay. Right? Because how many times when people, like you said, you go across and when you hear the stories, I don't care how many times you hear it, it's like, it's unbelievable, right? You hear somebody saying it's been 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's been 2 years. But we know defendants have a right to a speedy trial. Right? But when you are as a crime victim is going through, there's no protection that guarantees you that you're going to get the speedy trial. So that's one of the things he wanted in there.
That's a good one.
For example, my daughter, her remains were brought to me, and they couldn't, the blood, the DNA and stuff, it goes through. So in the speedy trial, they have 45, 90 days or whatever for the speedy trial. But with the medical examiner's office and for the DNA and everything to come forth, that takes over a year to come through. So they're getting off because they don't have the evidence available. They don't have access to it. So who holds once Marsy Law goes forward? If we vote it in, how is the court and the people held accountable if they don't interpret the law the way we should? Because there were times where I was threatened arrest, trying to get what the Constitution is written and read here right now. I was threatened to be arrested for trying to exercise my rights to let me know what's going on with my daughter's case. Help me to find my child at the time she was missing. And who holds these officers, these detectives, this court? Who holds it accountable?
Letter O.
Oh.
Letter O.
Can you read, sir?
It currently says information about the outcome of the case and the release of the accused. But the new one would read, upon request to reasonable and timely information about the status of the investigation, the outcome of the case. Right? And so that itself written into the Constitution now holds them accountable. You are guaranteed that as part of your constitutional right as part of this referendum for Marsys Law.
Okay, but then we go back to the defendant's rights versus the victim's right. Because now my daughter, she's no longer a victim, she's deceased, and her family were victims, correct?
Correct.
So then, when I'm going to ask for information, or, okay, with the DNA, he gets a speedy trial, but we don't, I'm told the day before the trial that, okay, it's 1 billion times as likely that the victim was related to me. But we can't use this evidence because it wasn't, they have to know within 45 days, but they only get 90 days, and, so they're pushing people along and they're not using valuable evidence because it's not being made, it's not made available within that speedy process.
That's one of the issues that you have to be consistent, right? Because now you got to rely on, do we have the technology? Where do we got to send this in order to get the DNA and stuff like that? But the other thing is that on the last page also, as a victim, if you feel that the police aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, okay, you may literally write to the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court, right, to actually review what your issues is throughout the process, right? Now, we don't know what the consequences are going to be yet because we haven't even got this in place yet. So once we get this in place, you'll start to see more information talking about this is how we're going to respond to these types of written complaints. And so there will be a way for victims who feel like they aren't getting the respect that and the dignity that they deserve as a victim, for you to take a recourse against whoever that person may be within the system.
And once the referendum is approved, it doesn't, so the formation of everything that's happening doesn't just stop, okay? Like it's April 7th, we go out, we vote, it's approved, it becomes law. Well, now there is a process of how to carry this out and how to make sure it's being carried out the correct way. So there'll still be people working, making sure this process is a smooth process and all the kinks are worked out and everybody are notified.
That's good. That's good to know.
May I add to that
Yes,
statement?
so, yes.
I was talking with the victim services in Waukesha, and I know that those folks out there are already setting plans into place saying if this goes through, this is how we're looking to apply these and get stuff going right away. So I know that there are people in the area that are already working on this and making it something that's going to be applicable right away.
And I want to be realistic, so I don't, oftentimes, and I say this to a lot of people, the legislation portion is easy. I mean, that's just a bunch of us getting together, writing stuff. The execution of the stuff and the time frame, and I want you to put it into, as important as it is, there are thousands of people going through some of this stuff. And so imagine a new process and all those people feeling the same way as many of you, the hold up and who's doing what. And so a lot of times I don't want us to think that once it's done, we won a small victory, but we still got work to do. There's still some things that we need to stay on and continue to advocate for, because it's not just going to change overnight. And
Who should the community connect with to make sure that we're still moving things along?
You and Natalie. I mean,
Great answer.
And check is in the mail.
And Representative Fields is right, because you still got to go through the whole rules making process about what this is going to look like, right? But this is the other key, right? This is also your time to be fighting for more funding for the court system, to making sure that this can actually work, right? So I'm going to do a quick little plug.
Please.
One way to do this is to make sure that everybody's counted during the census 2020, right? There are dollars that come from the census that make sure that we can put more money into like victim witness protection programs, right? To make sure that we can put more money into the domestic violence prevention program. So when we talk about dollars that can affect change, because we can talk about it all day, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to change the culture within the system. You got to make sure that we invest in the system to make sure we actually see the change. And one way is making sure that we get accountable.
Well, so on a county level, where does the county executive play into that with the new programs and everything?
Well, see, at the county level, so the courts it's a county function. So the Milwaukee County government is an extension of the state of Wisconsin. And so at the county level, the county executive will actually have a way to actually work with the chief of courts and the court system itself in making sure this is in place. But we also work with like victim witness advocates. We work with all these different programs. So that gives us the ability to kind of do our own internal audits to make sure things like this are taking place and we're making our justice system as sound as it can be.
Okay. Yes.
But I think that what we need to do is we need to do something with this voting rights. There's people living out their cars who can't use their last address, who aren't able to vote right here in this neighborhood here in the inner city. So until we can get our whole people accounted for, our census is not going to be working properly. It's not going to fund these programs that you speak of.
Well,
So how do we do that?
Well, one thing about the census is you don't need an ID to fill it out. And so, whoever it is, just make sure that everybody is counted. Is going to be very extremely critical that we are talking to some of our most, so let me backtrack. And I want everybody to understand this. Milwaukee County is one of the largest hard to count counties in the nation when it comes to the census. And so it's extremely important that we're reaching out to all of the undercounted areas, which is our communities of color. One of the biggest groups that are missed out when it comes down to the census are children 5 and under. People don't feel like they need to count their children. And even when we talk about undocumented immigrants, undocumented population, making sure that they are counted as well. Because these are dollars and cents that come back to this community. It's about $1,200 to $1,500 a year per person that comes back to this community. And
So is it the fear of not really understanding?
Well, nobody trusts the government, right? So,
yeah, right.
And we want to stay on point, but at the end, please ask David any questions because he's actually running for county executive in Milwaukee. And Jason is actually running for comptroller.
Yeah.
And comptroller controls a lot of where that money gets spent and where should we spend the money at. Maybe the comptroller okay spending for some housing for some of these homeless people, or spending some more money on victim rights services. So y'all can harass both of those two. After this session is over, I'll lock the door and won't let them go.
Perfect plan. Perfect. Believe me, we have
We are understaffed in the judicial system. We need a lot of money to go there. The DAs have very heavy caseloads, and that's where some money needs to go to.
I mean, it really boils down to, and I think you hit on it, because oftentimes we're in these silos, and unless you have a 1,000-foot view, you may not see how all this stuff is interconnected. I mean, from mental health issues to budgets to being understaffed in the DA's office, all this stuff has, it impacts all of us. And what I found is that really when you talk with a lot of constituents, people wouldn't mind paying more taxes if they knew what the return on that investment was going to be. If they were getting the services, then people don't necessarily have a problem with that. People do have a problem with you increasing my taxes, you asking me for more money, but yet when I call the police, they ain't there. Or who do I call to find out about my daughter's? So when I'm not getting service, you asking me for more money, that's a problem. But we have to figure out, what I've always told people is when you get in your lane, like Laverne and Natalie, this is their lane and they do it well. And so people like David and I as legislators and the Marsys Law advocates, we can come together on this issue and go full blast and hard on this issue. But when I start to ask them to do other stuff outside of what they're already good at doing, now I'm taking resources, I'm taking their time and energy, and then what'll happen is the momentum and the fire will start to die down. So we need to continue to support them and do what they do, because as you can see, truth be told, this room should be packed.
Yes.
I think so.
This room should be packed. And between all of us in this room, since I know most of you, we all know a lot of people that should be here. So we just have to continue to support.
And we're gonna do it again too, because we really want to make sure people are informed.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you the truth, I talk to a lot of people on a daily basis, and I have not encountered one alderperson yet who already knew about Marsy Law and the fact that it was going to be on the referendum. And so we need to make sure we're doing that. So you'll see me going around asking people to make a post on your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whichever social media you got, and encourage your friends to do too in support of Marsy Law, because what it does is it causes people who don't know what it is to go and Google it, research it, look into it, ask questions. And so that's what this is about today, right? Is giving people a chance to ask questions. And as people start to hear about it more and more and more, then it'll get out there. So I think next time we have one of these, we'll have another one coming up next month sometime, and I'm sure we'll get a room full, and we'll get Jason and David back. We'll go ahead and ask them that now, put them on the carpet. Call the question is what I used
While
to
the camera is rolling.
Right. Can we call on y'all to come back again and speak on this?
It depends on what it is.
But I want to give Natalie a chance to speak too, because she's been really
I've
quiet.
been really quiet.
Yes.
And the reason why I feel like I've been really quiet is because Marsys Law, as I was, me and Laverne were going through this a couple weeks ago, and a lot of things hit home with me specifically because I was in the court system for a year. And I've heard numbers, staggering numbers, every time I go and speak somewhere. A woman comes up to me and say, well, I spent 983 days in the court system. And that's a long time to not be living your life after you chose to leave an unsafe situation. You're constantly pulled back and forth, your finances are drained, your children are in limbo, you don't know if you're gonna have your children may be living with someone, you may have, your children may be in foster care, you're fighting for your kids, you're going through a criminal case. I mean, there's so many tentacles attached to this, and just to have something solid to support us is necessary. So I get a little quiet simply because, you know, I want these guys to give us as much as they can so we can be more educated, because that is what is needed. When I was in the court system, thankfully, I had people that knew some things that could better educate me and guide me and navigate through the complexities of the justice system.
But it was still,
It's still
hard. It's
still hard. I mean, I was just thinking to myself, you know, the first level was meeting with a commissioner who did not communicate, or I just felt there was no communication between the court systems when you're at a family level, a criminal level, and then there were 3 other levels. We're going through a divorce. So there are 3 things that I'm in court for, and it's like no one's communicating with anyone that this is a criminal case. That should be a red flag. Hello, red flag. Why do I have to co-parent in exchange at a police station, and I'm living in a shelter and I have to pay my abuser child support? What is that? That's a problem, you know? So I'm really appreciative of this, and I think that, you know, we really have to continue to increase momentum behind educating one another, the community. So I appreciate you all, and I'm not here to really take the floor. I'm here to listen and, you know, allow others to ask as many questions as they can, because it gravely impacts all of us.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
So, and that's the good thing, is that we need to let people know that even if it's not directly impacting you, that you can still be affected
Yes.
by this. So that's the important thing, because I know that people can feel disconnected. Oh, that's not happening to me and my family. It's not happening to my kids. It's not happening to my mama. You know, it doesn't bother me. But yeah, when you go to work, you may have a coworker who's dealing with that and they're not being productive at work. You may have one of your kids' friends who's at school dealing with some stuff, and now that they're bullying, because of those effects, they're bullying your child, essentially. So it can come around to affecting you. You just have to be aware and understand that it takes a community to make change happen. And I think I definitely hats off to you guys, definitely, for being able to speak on and trying to pass this in April, and sharing your stories as how we can better make this better, and understand that we still have work to do. This is not going to happen overnight, but those of you who are here want to make that change. And we'll go back into the community and we'll continue to talk to the people that we need to talk to. And just like Jason said, is that this room should be full, but they're missing out, and we're just going to continue doing what we do. You guys will continue doing what you do.
I would like to add just one more thing. I would say everybody should, excuse me, everybody should know and talk to your elected official on every level, because good legislation doesn't necessarily just flow from us. Like, we get it from the people who are going through some things. Like, we talk, and there was some things that they both said that, you know, David and I are like, that makes sense. we know we may have to deal with that coming down the line. And so you should always know who your legislators are, because like Simon said, at different levels, they may not even know this is going on, even though we think they should. At a city level, they may not connect how this plays into what they're doing, but it does. It does as funding, because in one way or the other, you're going to pay for it on the end, either on the front end or the back end. If we continue to let this kind of trauma happen, we're going to end up paying for it. So it's best to find ways we can reduce it on every level.
So, any more questions? So we're gonna just go one by one.
I was gonna add
Oh,
one
okay.
thing too. One thing that struck me too as I was looking over the victims' rights and what this is doing. Obviously, I shared a little bit about how it has impacted me, but to your point a second ago, I think this in particular would be something that everyone, I think, would have interest in, because you never know when you're going to be a victim, and anyone could be a victim at any point. So I do really believe that this is something for every single person to pay attention to get educated on, to read about, and to vote on. Because the reality is you never know when you could be a victim. Like you said, most of us in some way have been impacted, whether we've been through it ourselves or we know someone or our kids know someone who will be impacted. But also the reality that, you never know when you could be a victim, and it's really important to be educated on this yourself and to vote.
So we know an attorney, a female attorney, who would go into court and not understand why a woman wouldn't just leave, and she found herself in the same situation. So she shared with us how she was judging women for not leaving because in her mind it was based mind over matter. Like you can determine if you're going to be abused or not, and she found herself in that situation and had a rude awakening, unfortunately. But that's the thing, is that you don't think certain people feel like I'll never experience that, and that's just so not true. So not true. So we're gonna let you guys last parting words, and what you want us to take home with us and continue to share, and then we'll close it out after that. Jay?
I would say just make sure you reach out to every elected official in your area, on every level. They should know who you are. Let them know how important this is. Tell them, you expect them to support this.
Absolutely. I would just say, April 7th, make sure you go out and vote 2020, making sure you vote for Marsys Law. If you want more information, visit equalrights4wi.com. You can find a lot of the information there. But this is something that we definitely need when we think about making sure that we have equal rights. This is really balancing the scale of justice.
Thank you.
I would say that part of the journey for a victim and the healing process is finding your voice. For many victims, I feel like at one point or another, whatever the crime that caused you to be a victim, to some degree you feel like you've lost your voice. And to be able to speak out about it, and then to be heard, like you said, speaking to the community, speaking to their legislators, speaking up in your case, being able to advocate for yourself, and the re-traumatization of what it's like to be a victim. But having your voice being heard is important, and a lot of those issues are addressed in what this passing this law would solidify. And I just think that's really important, and that we believe victims and that we hear their stories. And I think the other ones that are shared, I'm sorry for what you've gone through, and thank you for sharing. I mean, you're in a situation to all those that have shared. And it's important that we really, as a community, not alone legislators, but as a community, that we're listening to people's stories and that we're believing victims.
I actually agree with that. To piggyback off of what you said, just having open and honest conversations with one another, bringing your family members into the conversations, bringing friends into the conversations, and then eventually moving on to our legislators and getting our conversation out there. Just because and again with the voice, is if people don't know, and as you were saying, if people don't know what is going on, it's difficult to pass laws and to have those written because there's no awareness of it. And I think, thank you and Natalie for always doing such a great job of bringing awareness to this topic. But again, understanding that, as she was saying, it's difficult for victims through the process to even have a voice and say that this is what I'm going through. I mean, they may be so emotionally, abused and drained and degraded, and that they don't even feel like they can speak to anybody, or maybe they feel like nobody will believe them if they speak up, and then that kind of holds up the process too of everything. So just encouraging everyone to have these open and honest conversations, to know how to communicate with family members and friends, to be able to bring these things to the light, and then do research on the current laws and legislations, and understand how that impacts the community directly and how to change it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Any parting words, Nat?
No, just thank you to each and every one that has come. We don't take this lightly at all. We have work to do. I think everyone that's here is someone that wants to be here because they see that there's a need and that they're out here with us in the trenches, showing up and making some things happen. So I'm excited and ready for the next opportunity to host another event like this, so we can pack out a room, pack out whatever type of space, and allow people to come in and share. We had someone come in late.
I feel so sorry I'm late.
That's okay. Well, you're here. Thank you.
No, I don't know what all you guys discussed. That's why I was like, I should stay quiet. Because I'm sure you guys might have discussed everything.
Nah, we was waiting on you.
No,
Right.
No, I was just wondering, because I had talked to Lena Taylor about this, but it's a guy on Facebook, and he's trying to push for legislation for them to actually register as domestic violence abusers, as opposed, it's like they slip through the cracks and they keep going on to abuse other women, and sometimes they escalate in what they do, and so this way it's just like when a sex offender registers, you can actually look up and say, oh, you know what, this is the wrong person, because sometimes they can hide things in the beginning and the woman may not know. And I mean, then it's the red flags that a lot of women don't know about either. But at the same time, we have that problem where he's got this long line of women, and we don't even talk about the men that have gotten away with murdering women and went on to murder others. So it's, I don't know, for me, I'm always about, it's a matter of life or death. And all of this, anything you guys discussed before I got here, it's a matter of life or death, because when you talk about even things like visitation, and she told me I watch too much news, but the social worker that was bringing the children to visit their father, and the children ran ahead of her. And the dad opened the door and let the kids in, locked the door. She's calling the police. The police are not understanding that this man is having supervised visits because he's an abuser, and they're not listening to her. He sets the house on fire and he kills himself and the children. And the police are like, well, man, what? That's his children, and they just nonchalant about it because they don't understand, and that's like what the little bit I did it, they don't understand all the logistics and the pros and cons and the dangers and the fears that we have from experience of being with these men, and for them to make decisions based on lack of knowledge, and especially in the court system, you really get re-victimized over and over and over again. And it can be really sad. You have them taking the children from I'm just using this, but it could be vice versa, male, female, whatever. But they're taking the children from the mother and giving them to the father. Why? Because the father says, oh, just, you know, do a psychological eval on her. Well, you've been gaslighting her, manipulating her for how many years? And you want them to do a psych eval on her? She's not a bad parent. She's not crazy. She's been abused, verbally and emotionally, and psychologically, but she's not a bad parent. So, of course, she doesn't pass the psychological eval. What do? They give the child to the abusive father.
So that just shows that we got work to do.
Yes, all of us.
We have work to do in many areas of
And I hope I didn't
protection.
repeat nothing somebody else already
No.
said.
No.
Okay.
That's Miss Lisa.
Thank you,
Miss
Miss
Thanks,
Lisa.
Lisa. But yes, that just means that again, we have work to do, and our start is April 7th, and making sure that we get out and vote, and look forward to us doing another informational session soon. And I'm Laverne Badger.
I'm Natalie Hayden.
And we're Exposed Podcast, and we are signing off. And
Yes.
thank you guys,
Thank you guys
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Yes.